I couldn't help but want to ask a question, which has been in my mind since reading 21st Century Psychoanalysis. And there you emphasize, and I think you really do this in a way that many colleagues are not able to do it as well, but you help us think mid-period Lacan in terms also of much later theoretical contributions. And one of the areas where I got so excited in reading this was you speak a lot about the semblant, whatever, however we're going to pronounce it. This is a kind of, I believe, a kind of make-believe or pretense object, and it entails a charge of jouissance. But I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about what the semblant is, about how it brings about changes in accompanying concepts in the later Lacan. So I suppose I'm both just interested in that concept and how it would encourage or even force a slight recalibration or rethinking of surrounding concepts in Lacan. I can give you just a brief quote that I pulled out of 21st century psychoanalysis. And you note there, Object A residue of jouissance in Seminar 10, is reformulated in Seminar 20 as a semblant of being. The same is true of the other. This had substance as the treasure trove of signifiers. Here too, we find a shift in Lacan's teaching to an other which is barred, which does not exist, but still functions as a semblant.
Great question. It cuts across, some of the points I try to make in both books. And, I think let's approach this first from the standpoint of clinical practice. So in the third chapter, the Ames book, I take a look at 3 cases, one of which is the Ratman case that I assume many of your viewers will know this case well. And if you think about how Freud practiced in that case, and it's a case that Lacan studied and wrote a paper on, the neurotics individual myth, this is work from very early in his career in the early 50s. So in that approach, Freud analyzes the different phenomena that the Ratman brings in the course of his analysis, and sort of decodes all this based on this treasure trove of signifiers that are part and parcel of the Ratman's unconscious. So you may recall all these sort of very interesting details about the meeting, how the Ratman's parents met, and issues that his father was dealing with regard to money and the choice of a woman, and he married the rich woman and not the other woman he was in love with, and so forth. So there are all these different details that get brought up in the course of the analysis that Freud and Lacan, early Lacan, ultimately agree really are determinant for the specific obsessional structure and the symptoms, the very interesting symptoms the Ratman suffered from. So in that kind of a world, those signifiers kind of have substantial value. It's like they're the stuff of analysis. Mm-hmm. They have substance, and they are determinate in the pathology, you could call it, using this kind of older terminology that would be appropriate for this way of thinking of the Ratman. That is a world where the signifiers, you could almost say, really exist. They have substance or being to them. And because of that, they have this function of causing these things that the Ratman is dealing with and trying to get help with from Freud. What happens, I would argue, between that moment in the 14 of the case and the early 50s, by the time you get to this later Lacan, the signifiers and the imaginary, the semblant is kind of a imaginary symbolic structure that doesn't have substance as such, but nonetheless can have an effect on jouissance, you might say, or something like that. And by the time you reach seminar 20, it's jouissance itself, or the libido, to put it in Freudian terminology, that is the real substance of psychoanalysis. But it's not a substance that you can grasp or point at or measure or anything like that. It's a kind of substance that doesn't really exist, or it exists, to use one of these kind of Lacanian phrases. It exists through its insistence on the speaking beings, but it doesn't exist in the sense of a typical object, like a coffee cup or something like that. So semblance, what I kind of alluded to is the fact that these things that in the 50s for Lacan had substantial status, like the other, as a treasure trove of signifiers. You imagine a chest with little signifiers in it and so forth. Or the object A. The object A, as it was first developed in Seminar 10, is a kind of, the term that's often used is a remainder, a residue, or something like that. It's a little piece of the body that is extracted from the subject, that isn't fully symbolized, and has a kind of, you could almost say, a real status for a speaking being. And if you go back and read, I had the opportunity to give a little talk on chapter 17 of Seminar 10 this past year, and I forgot just how concrete Lacan is at this moment. He talks about the oral object. People always think about as being the breast, the breast of the mother. Mm. If you go back and reread Lacan, when he introduces his notion of the oral object, it's the mamma, and he describes it as originally a piece of the embryological tissue of the developing, tiny egg that is going to grow up to become a human, is extracted from the rest of the future speaking being, becomes the original source of nourishment for the speaking being, and then is implanted in the placenta as a way of nourishing the speaking being through the uterine lining from the mother. And then later, the mamma is implanted on the breast in the nipple as Lacan develops it. So it's this piece of the subject that's really pulled out of it, and it's a very concrete language that Lacan uses at this point to describe an object A. But by the time you're in Seminar 20, even the object A is merely a semblant of jouissance. It's not the actual object of jouissance itself, but a kind of he calls it a semblant of being. It's how you might imagine jouissance taking a form of being, should that be possible. I think this is, I think, how he tries to use this notion of a semblant. It's not the easiest thing to try to get a handle on. So
yeah. But it's a marvelous piece of intertextuality, actually, a reminder, going back to Seminar 10, of how physical material those early references, that early language of description is.